amusing thing I'd ever seen and experienced. I can still, to this day, picture sitting in that little car with Maurizio. And honestly, I have loved the Fiat 500 ever since, and I'm not alone in that. I've made a lot of friends on social media, some of them now very close friends. And one woman I just recently met in person is Susan Labella. She comes to Rome and Italy all the time, and she told me about a recent delightful Fiat 500 tour that she participated in. So, Susan, I have to say that you have been the inspiration for my digging deeper into the Fiat 500 for this episode. And because of you, I've come up with a list of lots of Fiat 500 tours for everyone, all you listeners, to enjoy on your next trip here. Tours throughout Italy, really, in the Fiat 500. And all that information is included in today's show notes. But first, before we go any further, I think we need to go into a little bit of history about the Fiat 500. Fiat stands for Fabbrica Italiana Automobili Torino. And it kicked off in 1899 thanks to the world-renowned Giovanni Agnelli and some savvy other investors. And they set up their first factory in the north of Italy in Turin. And that's where the Fiat journey began, eventually turning it into a global automotive legend. So Fiat made a name for itself with these smart, efficient designs, especially in small, practical cars like the Fiat 500. Their first model, the 4HP, came out in 1899. And by 1900, they had 35 employees cranking out 24 cars. Now, that doesn't seem like much in today's world, but it was a lot then. So let's fast forward a bit. By 1906, they were producing over 1,100 cars a year, and they even went public as a company. They shipped their first car to the US in 1908, and they also started making aircraft engines. During World War I, Fiat shifted gears to military vehicles and equipment like so many companies. And by the 20s, they dominated the Italian market with an 80% share and built Europe's largest car factory, Lingotto. World War II brought more challenges as the company produced for the Axis powers. And then after the war, the Agnelli family was temporarily ousted, but then they made a comeback again in 1963. So there's a little bit of politics in the mix there, as well as their own corporate goals and initiatives. So by 1970, Fiat was booming, and they employed over 100,000 people and produced 1.5 million cars in Italy. They ran into some bumps along the road, but refocused on Europe and production in Europe for Europe. And they bounced back in the early 2000s under the leadership of Sergio Marchionne. That's when the star of our show came along, the Fiat 500, which was launched in 1957. This little gem was designed to be affordable and stylish, and it quickly became a cultural icon, and not just in Italy, but around the world. In 2007, Fiat reintroduced the car in a modern design, mixing the retro charm with modern tech, and it's really been a great success ever since, winning awards and hearts alike. And now there is an electric version of the car that was just released this year in 2024 in both Europe and the United States. If you look online, and I'll include a link to both companies in Italy and in the United States, the car is adorable. It's a two-door, which has its disadvantages, but it's adorable. So let's get back to the growth of Fiat. So Fiat didn't just stick to Italy. They have manufacturing plants in Brazil, Argentina, Poland, Mexico. And then in 2011, they re-entered the North American market with the new Fiat 500. This was after they teamed up with Chrysler in 2009. So, like any good story, Fiat had its ups and downs. They faced a crisis in the late 80s and had to adapt to changing markets. They stopped making the 500 in 2019. And as I said, they've rolled out this new electric model just this year, which shows their commitment to innovation. Fiat has scooped up tons of awards, including 9 European Car of the Year titles. And they're also recognized corporate-wide for their low CO2 emissions, often ranking lowest among cars sold in Europe. There are lots of fun facts I'd like to share with you about the Fiat 500. They used to have suicide doors, and they were called suicide doors because they had these rear hinged doors that were later switched to a safer variety in 1965. This Fiat 500 has traveled all around the globe. One 1969 Fiat 500 traveled 35,000 kilometers around the globe. You could say that this has been the world's hairiest car because an Italian hairdresser covered a Fiat 500 in 120 kilograms of human hair, which earned it a Guinness World Record. I mentioned when I was in the car with my husband, it seemed like the tiniest little thing I'd ever been in, but actually it's surprisingly spacious. And in fact, in 2011, 14 students squeezed into a 1972 Fiat 500 during IKEA France's Green Week. You can get this car into the tightest little parking spots imaginable. One stunt driver parked a Fiat 500C in a gap just 7.5 centimeters longer than the car. The Fiat 500's also a fashion icon, and the Fiat 500 Gucci edition features Gucci's signature stripes and branded alloys. There is a way to incorporate a built-in espresso machine into your car. And the modern Fiat 500 can have a Lavazza espresso machine built right in. By the way, Lavazza is also headquartered up in Turin, so it was a natural partnership between those two companies. One Fiat 500 was customized with 24-karat gold and a high-tech audio system, making it pure luxury. Now, James Bond connection, well, it's kind of, he never drove one. But a Fiat 500 was in a high-speed chase and actually, I believe, pushed off the road in the 215 James Bond film Spectre. It's also a royal favorite, favored by the Italian royal family for short trips around Rome. This car is amazing, and you can get it in 20 different colors. It's featured in lots of films like The Italian Job and Vacanze di Natale. The Fiat 500 has even been used as a taxi in some Italian cities. And this may not sound like a very fast car, but considering its cylinders, it did have a top speed of around 75 miles per hour. It's been used in a lot of amateur racing events. And as I mentioned, it's eco-friendly. I said before that in Italy, the car is known as affectionately as the Cinquecento. And the name Cinquecento means 500, which refers